everybody, and welcome to this episode of What's Next Live with one of my favorite humans, I have to say, Mr. Tom Peters. He joins us. I think you're in the East Coast today. Yes, Tom?
That is correct.
Well, we have done, I think this is our third, and Tom is the only guest I've ever had 3 times. So 3 is a charm. We are going to knock it out of the park today.
Well, before you make another sentence, thank you. I'm delighted to be your first triple header.
Well, you know, there's nobody I would rather talk to. Tom has a new book out called The Compact Guide to Excellence. Oops, if you haven't picked it up, go pick it up. It's an amazing little quick read that you should just put on your desk. What I've done since I got it actually is I'll open it up, whatever page it takes me to, I'll read what it says and I close it back up and put it back on my desk. It's a way for me to sort of reground myself every morning. So it's, greatly helped me over the last couple of weeks since I got it. And I might add, there was an amazing little note from Tom in it on the inside cover of the book. So it's always a treat. So listen, before further ado, let me kind of give a little history here. It was 1982, I think, when In Search of Excellence published. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I was a sophomore in high school. My stepfather thought it would be a really good thing to buy me a business book. And the first book I ever read was In Search of Excellence. And here it was, some 30 years later or 25 years later, we meet. I finally get to meet the author of the first book I read. We become friends. He endorsed my first book. He's getting ready to read my second. And this is the third time on the show. So as I said, it's just a pleasure to have you join us, Tom.
Tiffany, one small thing about your father and you. When the book came out, Peter Drucker, who was the god of management, thought In Search of Excellence was a little league thing whatsoever. And so he gave In Search of Excellence the ultimate criticism. He said, look, parents are buying it for their children. And I said, oh, shit. You couldn't ask for a better endorsement than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's be honest here. Did I read the whole thing cover to cover? No. Did I understand a lot of what you were saying? Probably not. But it inspired me to just go, there's this whole world out there. I knew I loved business. I didn't know what that was going to translate into. So it is one of those books I go back to. If I'm ever feeling a little stuck and I'm feeling like I can't sort of find my way forward, In Search of Excellence is one of those ones I will pick back up and reread. So I love that book. So thank you.
I do want to say one thing relative to any conversation with anybody. I would not disagree that it wasn't a pretty good book. But like most great successes in life, the timing was bizarre. It was so good. And, I've often said, Tiffany, and this could be a different discussion. I've said there are 3 kinds of people I hate in the world: mass murderers,
good,
child and spouse abusers, and number 3 on my list is successful people who think they deserve their success.
Oh.
If you really knock it out of the park, there were 18,000 times when you could have turned left instead of right, and to pretend that you were significantly in control of your own destiny is total crap.
Well, I think that goes to everything we do. I mean, I think that looking for those sort of, you stand on the shoulders of those before you. And like in the acknowledgement of my first book, it was a whole long list of people who, when I called, you being one of them, like, I'm thinking of doing this. What do you think? What would be new and unique and different? And what angle would I take? And that advice you get is invaluable, because either they've been there and done that, or they made the left versus right decision and they wish they'd made another one. And so those kinds of insights, looking to others, I think success is absolutely a team sport.
Well, I will also say, and I have no interest in talking about wokeism or anything like that unless you do, I never forget that I was born white, male, American, in a middle-class community of intelligent parents, and Protestant. And if you go back to when I was born in 42, I describe all that as the all-important first 99%. That's a lot of things to have going for you.
Yeah, and it's just an interesting time. And, I know if I go down this politics rabbit hole with you, we're going to keep going. So I'm going to pause that one.
No, I'm totally in favor of pausing it. It's just that I do remind myself that you had a lot of you were born on third base, as they used to say.
Yeah. Well, and rightfully so. I think we're now having the kinds of conversations we needed to be having, and hopefully we continue to have them, and we have them more, and we have them more often, and opportunities start to get a little more evenly distributed.
Yeah.
But let me jump in. You sent me something. It was now, I don't know if it's been a year or so, and it was Excellence, a summary, 43 years, 43 number ones. And what I love about this is there's only one number one, but there's 43 number ones. And the way Tom does it is there's a number one in 43 different categories. So I'm going to pick, which is a great little tip. I'm going to grab a couple and let's dig into it. So the first one is capital investment number one. You say training, exclamation point, training, exclamation point, training, exclamation point. If you know anything about Tom, it's threes and an exclamation point. So why
We're only
training?
5 minutes into this thing and you've given away all my secrets.
So why training 3 times?
Because, as you know, my thing is the development of people. And training is often used as an also ran. One of the things, I don't remember whether I said it in the 43 number ones, if you don't think training is important, pick up the phone and call a general, call an admiral, call a police chief, call a fire chief, call the lead operator of a nuclear power plant. But businesses seems to have always put it, or almost always put it, in second place. And the notion to me is it is, my twofer, and you may be getting the other one, is the number one investment is training. The number one capital asset is your portfolio of first line managers, because first line managers determine the outcome of approximately everything.
Right.
And my point is, we're too sloppy on both dimensions. People say, training, that's important stuff. It is not important stuff. It is life. I remember there was a quote in one of my books that obviously wasn't for me, but it was from what's his name, Warren Buffett's number 2. And he said, you would not believe how much time Warren Buffett spends reading. And I was with a guy who was a big deal investment banker based in Washington. And we were having dinner. And at one point he turned to me and he said, do you know what the number one problem is with big company CEOs? And being a lifelong smartass, I said, well, I can think of 50, but I don't know which one would be number one. And he looked at me, no grin on his face, nothing whatsoever. He said, they don't read enough. They don't read enough. They're not good enough students. And particularly, as you know, given who you work for better than I, things are moving so fast that it is studenthood for life or else.
Well, what's interesting is, when I used to be selling technology many, many years ago, and let's say it was $1 million project, right? And you had a scope of work and you had these milestone meetings, and then, executives or people would add things to, all of a sudden you've got scope creep and the $1 million project becomes 1.3 million or 1.4 million. And the very first thing they used to cut was training. Yep. Boom. Right. And there's that old saying, that the CFO saying, we're spending all this money on training, and what if we train all these people and they leave, right? And the response to that is, well, what if we don't train them and they stay? I mean, it's kind of like, right?
The
what's
first
worse?
guy who ever said that I heard that from, I don't know who really did it, was Richard Branson, I think.
Yeah, but I tried to find the source, recently, and I couldn't find the source either.
Yeah,
so
I don't doubt that for a minute.
Yeah, but I
if you're
love
somebody like Branson, half of what's said in the world, including the Bible, gets attributed to you.
Yeah. I'd say I attribute a lot to you, though. So don't give it away to everybody else. Okay, so that's capital investment 1 is training. Next one is commandment 1. And it is excellence is not an aspiration. Excellence is not a hill to climb. Excellence is the next 5 minutes. One of my faves of yours. All right. So commandment 1, excellent.
Uh, I mean, I don't know much of what to say other than what you just read. But let me tell you an experiment that I read about recently that I've started writing about a little bit. I don't know whether it was in the new book or not. But as students come into the 7th grade classroom, the teacher stands at the doorway, calls them by name, nods, smiles. It's just, good morning, Tiffany. Good morning, Tom. I know you had an awful cold last week. Are you feeling better? That's it. 4 minutes, 5 minutes. As a result of that, disciplinary problems go down by 25%, and academic engagement goes up by just about the same amount. And it's from the little teeny act of standing in a frigging doorway and acknowledging Tiffany Bova as a fellow human being. And it's, there are a million things like that, but it's not, it's not the big strategy stuff. Strategy is irrelevant unless you've got a turned on, excited, growing, well-trained set of your fellow human beings doing the real work. And that's as true, by the way, damn it, in the age of AI as it ever was. Different ways of people working, et cetera. But the importance of the human being has gone up, if anything.
Well, what I love about it, it's in the next 5 minutes. I think people overall right now feel overwhelmed, right? There's so much happening, work, personal, the economy, politics, like there's just a lot happening. And sometimes that next 5 minutes may be the next phone call or the next student that walks in the door or the next customer you visit or the next customer service agent you call. Like it's the next 5 minutes, right? And I think if you can just keep in mind that 5 minutes may be different for you than someone else, and how do we, keep this kind of extreme humanism, if you will, to use your terms, right, in looking for excellence in everything we do, right?
No, absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt. I couldn't agree more.
So the next one is, and there are more, but I just picked these. So job number 1, establish and maintain a people really first culture. So this is one where I know Tom definitely has an opinion, because it's people first, really people first, people first, people first. And I think people don't understand maybe what that means. I'd love to hear your description of really, people first, exclamation point.
Well, let me start at the tail end and then come back to the front end.
Okay.
For the CPAs amongst us, over the long term, it is the most effective way to grow the business and make money. This is not because, you may go to church every Sunday and you may not even know where a church is. It's not that. It's development of your fellow human beings. It's just so hard to talk about for me. I know I've written a lot of words because it is so obvious. I've always had this joke line, Tiffany. I'm living in New England, which is the home of the New England Patriots, which were never my favorite team, but that's neither here nor there. And my joke line is, the coach of the Patriots, Bill Belichick, comes in, signs me up to do an assessment of the Patriots. And so I spend 2 months walking around and so on. Finally, I get to the point where I'm in Belichick's office, and he said, well, what do you learn? And I lean over to him with incredible seriousness on my face and say, Coach, your players are really important. He picks up one of his freaking Super Bowl trophies and throws it at me. What the hell is the difference between the New England Patriots and a 50-person R&D department at Salesforce? None whatsoever. I've always said I have my ideal job, to stick with this topic, is I would like to be in charge of a 53-person housekeeping department in a big hotel. And I don't like the football analogies, but I will use them in this instance. I chose 53 because that's the number of players on an active duty National Football League roster. And so when I address my 53 folks for the first time, I say to them, look, there is no difference between the New England Patriots and this group of people. We are a group of people who are dedicated to helping other people, who are dedicated to each other's growth, who are dedicated to overall growth. There's not one iota of difference between that housekeeping department and the Patriots. A group of human beings are trying to achieve something in a way that is excellent, that is memorable, that is thoughtful, and so on. And, you know, I wrote a piece for the Financial Times, it was about a year ago now, and one of my comments in the piece was that the best way I can think of to have this reinforced more is to shut down and close down every business school in the world. Now I have degrees from them, so but you know, to be fair, it's, I don't know, it starts maybe at the admissions process. Why do people go to business school? For marketing and finance. And then, oh shit, I've got to take that people course. And so you really indelibly, the fun stuff is, you know, is playing around with spreadsheets. And it just, and I remember that, for God's sakes, without any question. It was, because I was a math freak. And I love doing the finance and I love doing the marketing. And then somebody said, well, we have this other course on people. And I said, is it required for graduation? You know, that's 180 degrees wrong. If I've got a fabulous set of people, my finance will be fine. It will be my finance department and my finances will be fine. I mean, yeah, the other part of it, which is, it's directly related, but with a little bit of an asterisk. I'm going to not use the punchline. I'll start with the story and keep the story short. I was giving a speech in Mumbai, and sitting across from me was a 4-star general in the Indian Army. And we got around to the topic of promotions and development and so on. And he said, you know, we were talking about promotions in particular. He said, I'm trying to decide between Tiffany Bova and Tom Peters for a promotion to general, which is a big deal. He said, there's only one thing that I am really interested in. It is not the profits on the way up or anything like that. It is, I am going to go back with a microscope and I am going to find every person in this organization who worked for Tiffany or worked for Tom. And the determinant factor is, did they grow significantly because of the 18 months with Tiffany? Did they grow significantly because of the 12 or 20 months with Tom? And you know, I think it was a wonderful thing to say. A leader is there to develop fellow human beings. They're not there to make the quarterly 90-day profitability to maximize it. That's not what the leader's there for. It's to grow an incredible group of people. You know, again, whether it's a hotel or whether it's a football team or whether it's an R&D department at a biotech company. But as you well know, you get me going on this topic, and we'll have to, you know, add a minimum of an hour to the conversation, and I'll still be just getting warmed up.
That's okay. That's what I love about you. But that leads me right to the next one. So I know you fairly well, which is calling number one, right? Leading and maximizing human potential, which is basically what you were saying. And I think I think as leaders, in how you just describe it, it really has to be a calling. You know, sometimes I see leaders get this accidental promotion up the leadership track, which they may never have aspired to do. But because they were a top performer here, you know, someone makes a decision that, well, because they're really good here, they're going to go here. That my stepfather not only gave me that book of yours, but he would say the Peter principle, right? Where you rise to the level of your incompetency. And his name was Peter. So we had fun with that one. But, you know, if you think about, the fact that people are getting promoted because they're really good at doing whatever they were doing doesn't necessarily mean that leadership, leading, people development was their calling. And so it doesn't always mean they're going to be super good at it. What happens when that happens, right? You have a leader where that's not their calling, and you have a leader where that is their calling. What happens there?
Is walk into the office of the boss of the leader and fire him.
Oh, okay.
Selection for promotion Peter Drucker years and years ago said, every promotion is a life or death decision. And, there was a whole book that came out a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and it was about hiring. And it said, hiring is the most significant thing that an organization does. We don't study it. We don't do anything other than be casual about it. Hiring and promoting are arguably the two biggest tasks. And what we do, and you kind of implied it in a different way, is, you've got an opening in the leadership position in the sales force, and you say, it's been open for 3 months. We've got to just grab somebody on the street and put them into that job. And sometimes we do that. The one-liner I remember hearing a million years ago, which is exactly what you said, is never promote the best salesperson to sales manager. That's a little harsh, but it's not that harsh. It's a different sort of thing to be an individual performer. And the only reason, back to my other point, the only reason a leader exists on earth is to develop other people, period. And if you don't have people in leadership positions who don't get that, you're just totally screwing up. And and the numbers are there. You said it at the beginning in the introduction. If you invest in people, you make more money. And we have effed that up to a fairly well in this country. My favorite, by which I mean most hated, numbers are in 1970, I think it was September, Milton Friedman wrote a famous / infamous article in the New York Times in which he said corporations have no social responsibility.
Yep.
At the time that was written, 1970, 50% of corporate profits went to shareholders, executives, and so on.
And not employees.
50% of corporate profits went to people, research, etc. My old friends at the now discredited McKinsey and Company took a look at the numbers in 2014, and 44 years later, and I do not believe these numbers, except I believe the analysts, 9% of the money went to people in R&D, and 91 frigging percent went to shareholders, share buybacks, executives out. That is, A, it's disgusting, and B, it, by the way, explains indirectly a lot of the social unrest that surrounds us today.
Oh, and I used that story in my upcoming book for that very reason, right? That if you're not investing in the people, right, it really starts at the top.
But from 50% to 9%, for God's sakes.
Yeah, and like I want to go back to what you said about, I was an individual quota-bearing sales rep. I got moved into management of a team, and then eventually I moved up and up and up and up. And along the way, back then, this is sort of, late 90s to sort of, the middle of the 2000s. Looking back, I realized I could have been a much better leader and a manager, and all, because I was not sort of trained along the way.
Yeah.
We were performing, we were hitting numbers. I was doing what I was supposed to do on paper, right? The productivity KPIs were check, 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 check. But was I good at developing people? Well,
yeah.
I didn't know how to do that, right? So I did it the best I could. And so I always think back that what would I do differently now if I was leading people again, because I'm not a people leader now. So what would I do differently? And I think I would do a lot differently because, I was individually like burning out, but I was then also burning out my people. I was individually setting these sort of unrealistic, kind of execution goals that they didn't have the systems and tools at the time to get them done. So it was just more manual labor. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but I always say, I think once
you should go on and on and on. It's the most important thing we're talking about. I'll finish this up by interviewing you. How's that?
But I would just say that it's the reflection, right? It's the how I handled a really tough situation. Would I do it differently now that I've read another book or listened to another podcast or had a different discussion, or I'm more mature in my career, whatever? Would you do things differently? And I think that reflection is a must for people, individuals, and especially for people leaders, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. There's some interesting research by a Canadian person, a guy who does what we do, and Henry Mintzberg is his name. And he made this fascinating discovery, and it's at least indirectly related to what you were saying. At graduation, engineers and other degrees like that get twice as many job offers as liberal arts majors at roughly twice the salary.
Right.
By year 20, the liberal arts people have flown past the engineers because, by and large, statistically speaking, the engineers have got a deficit. I'm one of them, for God's sakes. So I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about me. And, relative to what you were just saying, and I know this sounds kind of strange and it would take more than a 30-second answer, but I went to the Stanford Business School, and by sheer luck, I ended up, there was a course that was required, kind of the people course, called Organizational Behavior. And I ended up with a teacher who became my closest friend in life, in every sense of the word. And he, turned me toward exactly the sorts of things you're talking about. And I never forgot it. There's another story I'd love to tell, but we have not got all the time in the world. And I will. I'll tell you very quickly. So my parents had the money. The Navy paid my way through university, and I paid them back with 4 years. Vietnam War starts at just about the same time I start my professional career. I'm a construction guy. There's construction people in the Navy called the Seabees. I fly across the Pacific, land on the other side, and was issued ammunition for the .45 caliber gun, even though fighting was not what we regularly did. And suddenly, legally, there are people who in the middle. Suddenly, legally, I am responsible for the lives of 15 sailors. When that tour of duty was over, Tiffany, and I can't really use the language in a public setting, I went back to Cornell and I confronted the dean of civil engineering, and I said, "You taught me how to add 1 and 1, 2 with 1 and 1 and get 2 with unequivocal, superb work. You taught me not one frigging penny about leadership. And when I was put in charge of the lives of 15 people, I was absolutely dead flat nude in terms of my training." And I said, "I'll never forgive you."
Yeah.
I said, "I'll never forgive you." It was unconscionable.
Well, I think that this is, so if you're listening to this, right, and I always believe in being a student of your profession. So if you're a first-time leader, if you aspire to be a leader, like, do the work, right? Read books, listen to podcasts, have conversations with people in your own organization or other organizations who are leaders. Ask them what their opinion is, what works, what doesn't work. You have to find your own rhythm for sure. But I agree. I mean, I think, I was promoted without that training. Was I successful from a pure number standpoint? Yes. But was I successful in doing the things we're talking about right now? I'd probably give myself, C plus, B minus, but it wasn't for the lack of trying. It was for the lack of having that guidance and those insights and somebody to really spend the time with you to say, look, this is how you do, A, B, and C, right? Your goal number one is people. Like, let's invest in training. All of those things that we've been talking about, I think, comes down to that. But I want to end this because, of course, we could go all day, which we might as well just try. But we could go all day. Let me wrap this up with one sort of story, and then I know this one will get you riled up again as well. Is
Me riled up?
Yep.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yep. So, I often get asked this question: what do you think we should be doing? Like, Tiffany, you talk to, thousands of companies and executives, and you advise, and you've done all these. What do you think we should be doing? And I used to answer that question really quick. Oh, here's 1, 2, 3. Here's the things I think you should be doing. And I think I did a terrible disservice back then, right? Going back to things I would change now that I know more than I knew then. It is, I would say, now I actually come back and say, I don't know. What do your customers say? And what do your employees say? When you tell me the answer to those questions, those two questions, I'll come back and tell you what I think you should do. But the answer lies in those two groups. It doesn't lie in your office, the four walls, in a spreadsheet, in a dashboard. It doesn't lie in your executive team leadership offsite. That's not where it lies. And so I often then say that, and then they'll go through, well, our survey last year told us da 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 da, right? Or our net promoter score on the customer is, third highest in the industry or whatever. And I go, so they're happy, not happy. It doesn't tell you anything else, really. And so I always say management by wandering around, a la Tom Peters, right? And people sort of look at me and I said, it's like undercover boss. Like that management by wandering around. If you don't know what I mean, watch Undercover Boss. The prequel is they're getting hair and makeup put on and no one would recognize them anyway because they never leave their office. So it's wasted TV time. And then they go into the field, right, with the people. And they realize these things that are like, how do you not know that's happening in your business? Now, you can't know everything, but the things they highlight are big things like no training, no security measures, no, whatever it might be. And you go, how did they miss that? It's because they're not going out and talking to the people. So
the day that my co-author of In Search of Excellence, Bob Waterman, and I went from the McKinsey San Francisco office down to Hewlett Packard, which wasn't the monster bureaucratic company of today. It had just passed the $1 billion mark. I call it the most important day in my life, or my professional life, because that's when we sat down, talked with the president of HP, John Young, and he introduced us to MBWA, which I had never heard of. And after our discussion with him, he then, here's the president of a $1 billion company. After talking about it all, he grabs Bob and I, and he said, I can't tell you what this MBWA is about. Come with me. And we spent a half an hour wandering through the engineering spaces. John Young, president of a $1 billion company, had no difficulty talking with a 25-year-old engineer or what have you. He was comfortable as the Dickens, and they were comfortable as the Dickens talking to him. And it may sound like hyperbole, but the other thing I learned, which is also incredibly important, I would have 4 degrees, Tiffany, all quant, 2 business, 2 engineering. What I learned with MBWA is that leadership is an intimate act. It is about that 5 minutes and the human interaction between Tiffany Bova and Tom Peters. And I can be the general and you can be the private, or you can be the general and I can be the private. One of my favorite little stories, Field Marshal Montgomery was the guy who was in charge of the British at D-Day. And the person in charge of the entire D-Day landing was General Dwight David Eisenhower, later President Eisenhower. On the eve of D-Day, Montgomery, they say, gave one of the great speeches in history, pumping people up. I can't say this I'm talking to you and I'm tearing up, and I've told the story 150 times. Eisenhower, who never wore medals on his jacket, Eisenhower went out to the beaches on the side of the English Channel, walked amongst the privates and corporals, and put his arm around them and had a 30-second chat with Tiffany or Tom. And boy, you talk about the difference in leadership style. I just, I can just literally see this, and that's MBWA from Mr. Young, and real intimacy from a 4-star general in charge of hundreds of thousands of people's lives.
Listen, it just doesn't get any better than that. So if you didn't know that management by wandering around story, and you haven't heard me reference it, because I think I reference it in every keynote speech and podcast I do when people are interviewing me, because it literally has the ability to change someone's trajectory of their career. I remember walking up to people I didn't know, and if they gave me that short 2 minutes of their time and attention, it had enormous impact on me. And when they didn't, it also had enormous impact on me. And so there's 2 sides to the coin. And I think that goes back to being a lifelong learner, being open and willing to hear things that you need to work on and hear things that you do really well. And so those superpowers you can double down on. But if you always put people at the center of your decisions, whether you're an individual contributor taking care of customers, or you're a leader managing a team of 1 or hundreds of thousands, I just don't think you have I think you're on the right track. You're just
Yeah.
going to find those things that others are not going to be able to. So with that, Tom, we've got to wrap this up. Although, as I said, we could talk all day. So go pick up your Tom Peters Compact Guide to Excellence, which he did as co-author with Nancy Green. It's a great, lovely book that you can absorb right on your desk. So thank you, Tom, for always putting out amazing content, and more importantly, always saying yes when I reach out to you. My first triple guest, and I can't wait to do it again. So any parting words for those of us that are listening?
I hate to finish with a story, but you opened it up.
All right.
And I'll finish with an MBWA story. I was doing a public television show, and we were out in Michigan somewhere at a parts plant, and the boss was Pat Carrigan, who was the first woman to ever run a GM parts plant. So we and my crew go out there, and at one point we go to the office of the union head, the guy who runs the UAW within that plant. And we sat down and talked with him, and the story, it was just so incredible. And we said, "What do you think of Pat Carrigan?" He said, "Let me answer in a different way." He said, "Pat showed up one morning, and it couldn't have been more than 30 minutes after that she wandered over to my office and knocked on the little half door and said, we'll make you the labor boss," and said, "Tiffany, can I come in for a minute and chat?" He said, "I have been in that plant for 20 years, and no plant manager has ever visited me in my office. I was always summoned." And, that's in the same league as General Eisenhower on the beach. 20 years, and you were always summoned to the boss's office, and this new person comes in, and just because it's what normal human beings do, the first thing she does, she knows it's a strong union operation, is wander down to the union guy's place and chat with him like you and I are chatting.
I think it's almost so basic that why doesn't everybody do it, right? I think that it's one of those, yeah. But for another conversation, so here live, I'm going to invite you for the fourth one. We'll do it sometime soon. Maybe we'll do it in person.
That would be nice.
Let's try to do the next one face to face. So with that, thank you so much, Mr. Tom Peters, for joining me on this episode of What's Next Live. Thank you all for joining. I will see you again next time. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tiffany. Always truly a wonderful experience. I appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend.